I swear I can make him see. The janitor's voice trembled like the fountain's ripples behind her. In the courtyard of Anderson Tower, marble gleamed under the evening sun, and the air smelled of money and impossibility. Ethan Anderson, the tech mogul who owned the empire, strode past the fountain with his phone glued to his ear, barely noticing his 10-year-old son, Noah, sitting silently in his wheelchair. Blind since birth, Noah had lived in a world where even his father's face was nothing but a shadow, a voice, a concept. That was when she appeared. Before we begin this incredible story, welcome. If you love cinematic tales that restore your faith in humanity, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers around the world. Now, let's begin. Anika Johnson, thin and quiet, her blue scrubs worn from years of invisible labor, pushing her mop bucket across the pristine floors. Security usually ignored her. The executives never even learned her name. But fate didn't. Their eyes met his unseeing and still, hers wild and knowing. She approached slowly, her reflection shimmering in the glass walls around them. Employees whispered, glancing nervously. Nobody approached the billionaire's son, not without permission. But Anika knelt anyway. You can't fix what God never broke, she murmured, her voice calm but commanding. Ethan stopped mid-sentence, irritation flashing across his face. Excuse me? But Noah tilted his head toward her, his expression shifting for the first time in hours. Someone was speaking to him. Not about him. Anika reached into her collar and pulled out a golden pendant, small, ancient-looking, shaped like an eye with a crystalline center. It caught the light, refracting beams across Noah's closed eyelids. Hold still, sweetheart, she whispered. Before fear could stop him, Noah felt warmth. Not from the sun. From her. The pendant glowed faintly, casting a soft golden shimmer that danced across his face like liquid fire. Then, Noah gasped. His hands flew to his eyes, rubbing frantically. It itches, he stammered, his voice cracking. Ethan lunged forward. Don't touch him. But Anika stayed steady. Her eyes locked on Noah's, her expression fierce and gentle all at once. Not an itch, she said softly. It's waking up. Suddenly, Noah's eyelids fluttered. A small beam of light refracted from the pendant swept across his face. And for the first time in 10 years, Noah's pupils contracted. Just barely. Just enough. He flinched. It's bright, he whispered, voice trembling with awe and terror. Ethan's breath caught. His son's face turned toward the light. Not randomly, not coincidentally, tracking it. The courtyard froze. Employees stopped walking. Phones lowered. Even the fountain seemed to pause mid-arc. For a moment, time itself held its breath. Then Noah blinked, really blinked, and whispered, his voice barely audible. Dad, is that you? Ethan Anderson could barely breathe. As his son's voice echoed through the marble courtyard, Dad, is that you? The word trembling, broken, but real for a moment. The entire world shattered and rebuilt itself in a single heartbeat. The fountain stilled. The murmuring employees stopped to stare. And Ethan's world built on logic, control, and billion-dollar certainty cracked open in disbelief. Then rage flooded in. He lunged forward, snatching Noah's wheelchair and yanking it back. Get away from him, he barked at Anika, his voice sharp and merciless. Security! But before the guards could arrive, Noah reached out, trembling fingers searching the air, and his small hand found his father's sleeve. Don't hurt her, the boy said, his voice hoarse but loud. Ethan froze. The sound his son's voice defending a stranger hit him harder than any accusation ever could. For 10 years, he'd prayed for a breakthrough. He'd spent millions chasing hope, hiring the world's best neurologists, building machines that could map the brain down to the neuron. And yet, a janitor, a woman whose name he didn't even know, had undone it in seconds. Security arrived, boots echoing on marble. 2 officers flanked Anika, hands hovering near her arms. She didn't resist. She simply stood, calm and unshaken, the golden pendant still glowing faintly against her chest. Sir, one guard said, uncertain. Should we remove her? Ethan looked at his son. Noah's face was tilted upward now, eyes half open, tears streaming down his cheeks, not from pain, but from light. He was trying to see, trying to hold on to the first glimpse of a world he'd only ever imagined. No, Ethan said quietly, his voice breaking. Nobody touches her. He knelt beside Anika, his hands trembling. What did you do to him? She met his gaze steady, unflinching, ancient. I didn't give him sight, Mr. Anderson, she said softly. I returned what was taken. At the hospital, chaos followed. White coats, blinking monitors, sterile fluorescent light that made everything feel cold and clinical. Ethan stood behind the glass observation window, watching as doctors swarmed around Noah like bees around honey. His hands trembled not from fear, but from something darker, guilt. The lead specialist entered, clipboard in hand, voice polished with corporate calm. Remarkable case, Mr. Anderson. Preliminary scans show neural activity in the visual cortex we thought was dormant. It's Unprecedented. Unprecedented. Ethan snapped, his voice cracking. A janitor off the street did what you couldn't in 10 years, and you're calling it unprecedented? The doctor adjusted his glasses, avoiding Ethan's glare. We followed all protocols, sir. Visual cortex development in congenital cases like this is... Protocols. Ethan's voice was ablade. You took my money. You promised breakthroughs, and you never even tried. Beside him, Anika stepped forward, her tone cutting through the sterile air like a scalpel. They didn't try because they didn't want to, she said quietly. They saw your name, your bank account, not your son. Ethan turned toward her, anger flickering, but behind it, something else. Truth. He felt it sinking in like a knife between ribs. The chief neurologist sighed and slid a folder across the table. You should see this, Mr. Anderson. Inside were pages of medical notes, stamped reports, neural scans, all declaring Noah's condition irreversible. But the last line stopped Ethan cold. Maintain diagnosis to preserve long-term funding. Grant approval. E. Anderson. He stared at the words, the ink blurring through sudden tears. They kept him sick. They turned his son into an income stream. You. His voice broke. You monsters. He tore the papers apart, the sound of ripping echoing like thunder in the sterile room. You sold my son's darkness. Anika stood silently, her eyes burning with fierce compassion. She said nothing. She didn't need to. For the first time in his life, Ethan Anderson, billionaire innovator, man of reason, builder of empires, was learning what true blindness felt like. The kind that comes not from the eyes, but from a heart that forgot how to see. The hospital corridor was too bright, too clean for what Ethan Anderson felt inside. The truth throbbed in his chest like a siren that wouldn't stop. They had engineered his son's blindness. Not nature, not fate. People. People who smiled in boardrooms, who sent quarterly reports with words like innovative care pathways and sustained treatment optimization. And he'd signed every one. He sat beside Noah's bed, hands clasped, staring at the small boy who now lay awake, fingers tracing the soft glow of the pendant Anika had left on the bedside table. You're safe, Ethan whispered, though his voice shook. I promise. I'll fix this. Noah turned his head slowly, uncertainly, and for the first time, his eyes seemed to focus. Just barely. Just enough. Not your fault, the boy said, his voice wobbling like a newborn learning to walk. Ethan's throat closed. For years, he'd convinced himself that throwing money at problems was love. That presence could be replaced by progress. But now, in the quiet hum of the hospital room, he saw the cost of his own blindness. Not just the darkness his son lived in, but the darkness inside himself. Behind him, Anika stood near the door, her hands still faintly stained from the crystalline dust of the pendant. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her very stillness was a mirror. And Lucas saw himself in it, not the powerful CEO, but a father who had stopped seeing his own child. He turned toward her. You, he said hoarsely. How did you even know? What made you look? Anika met his eyes, her voice soft but unshakable. Because I actually saw him, she said. Everyone else looked at the money. I looked at the boy. Her words landed like truth disguised as mercy. Ethan exhaled, defeated. You're just a janitor. How do you talk like you've lived 100 years? She shrugged, her gaze steady. Because on the streets, you hear everything no one else listens to. The room went quiet, except for the soft rhythm of Noah's breathing. For the first time, Ethan realized silence didn't have to mean emptiness. It could mean listening. He turned to his son, brushing a hand through the boy's hair. I've been blind too, he murmured. Later that night, when the city lights blinked through the hospital window like distant stars, Ethan made a promise. Not to his company, not to his legacy, but to the small boy sleeping beside him. He would tear down every system that profited from pain. He would stop paying for hope and start fighting for truth. Because for the first time, Ethan Anderson truly heard not through his eyes, but through the voice of a janitor who had shown him that money could build empires, but only love could break blindness. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the world outside the hospital felt heavier than ever. Ethan walked beside Anika and Noah through the sliding glass doors, the cold air biting his skin like guilt made visible. Noah clung to his father's sleeve, his small face turning toward every sound, every shift of light, the world overwhelming and new. Inside the car, silence took over again. Ethan stared at his reflection in the tinted window, a man who had everything, yet had failed at the one thing that mattered most. Across from him, Anika sat quietly, her eyes distant. He wanted to thank her, to say something that carried the weight of what she'd done. But words felt small compared to the miracle she'd given him. When they returned home, Noah wouldn't leave Anika's side. He followed her into the kitchen, into the garden, even sat near her when she was too exhausted to speak. She didn't treat him like a patient or a miracle, just a boy who was finally alive again. Ethan watched them from the hallway, feeling both admiration and shame twist inside him. Later that evening, as the house dimmed into soft amber light, Ethan found Anika standing by the window, gazing at the skyline. Why did you help him? He asked quietly. You didn't even know us." Anika's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered. "Because no one helped my brother," she said. "He went blind after a lab accident at your company. They called it unavoidable complications. I know what it feels like when the world decides your pain isn't profitable." The words hit harder than any accusation. Ethan swallowed hard. "Then help me make this right," he said. "Not with money, with truth." She turned toward him, her face softening. "Start by seeing him," she whispered. That night, Ethan knelt beside his son's bed, where Noah lay wide awake, hands tracing shapes in the soft glow of the pendant. "What do you see?" he asked gently. Noah smiled faintly, his voice trembling but sure. "Everything." Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned down and pulled his son close. "Then you'll never have to live in darkness again. Not while I'm still breathing." Outside, the wind stirred through the city, and Anika stepped into the night, her silhouette fading into the dark like a prayer carried by the air. Ethan watched her go, realizing that the woman who had nothing had given him the only thing that mattered, a reason to finally see. Sometimes we think seeing means using our eyes, but real vision begins with the heart. When we choose to look beyond money, titles, and pride, we rediscover our humanity. A single act of compassion can awaken truth, heal wounds, and even restore sight. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Would you have believed Anika? Would you fight to expose the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more cinematic stories that remind us. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who finally learn how to see. The story doesn't end here. Let continue. Days later, the story had already spread. Headlines called it "The Miracle at Anderson Tower." But for Ethan, there was nothing miraculous about it, only revelation. He stood outside Anderson Biotech's headquarters one last time, the same place where he had once signed contracts instead of asking questions. Now he was signing something else. A legal order, demanding a full investigation into the medical network that had profited from his son's pain. The men in suits tried to reason with him, to soften their lies with apologies. But Ethan's voice was no longer the voice of a billionaire. It was the voice of a father. "You blinded my boy for profit," he said quietly. "Now I'll make sure the world sees the truth." And somewhere in the shadows of Anderson Tower, buried in encrypted files marked Project VS-07, a darker truth was waiting to be uncovered. A truth that would shatter everything Ethan thought he knew about his son, his company, and himself. But that investigation would have to wait. Because right now, in the glass courtyard of Anderson Tower, the impossible was still unfolding. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the handles of Noah's wheelchair, his mind racing between disbelief and desperate hope. His son, his blind son, had just tracked light, had just responded to something he shouldn't be able to perceive. "What did you do?" Ethan's voice came out raw, barely controlled. "What the hell did you do to him?" Security guards closed in, forming a semicircle around Anika. Radios crackled, hands hovered near restraints. The head of security, Martinez, stepped forward, his voice tight with protocol. "Sir, we need to remove this individual. She may have administered an unknown substance." "I didn't hurt him," Anika said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through fog. Calm, steady, unnervingly so. She turned to face Ethan directly, and something in her eyes, ancient, knowing, certain, made him pause. "I didn't hurt him," she repeated softly. "I helped him see what was stolen." "Stolen?" Ethan's voice cracked. He was born blind, his optic nerves. "It's bright," Noah whispered. The courtyard went silent. Every head turned toward the boy. Noah's hands were still pressed against his eyes, but now his fingers trembled not in pain, but in wonder. His face tilted upward, searching, as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. "Dad, it's so bright, inside my head, like fireworks but quieter." Ethan's breath caught. Around them, employees had stopped pretending not to stare. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, screens glowing as they recorded the scene. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. "Did you see that? The blind kid, he's tracking light. Someone call the media. Get Dr. Kellerman on the line. Everyone out." Ethan's voice thundered across the courtyard, sharp and commanding. "Now, all of you delete those videos and get back to work, or you'll be looking for new jobs by morning." The crowd scattered like startled birds, but not before dozens of phones had captured the moment. The damage was done. By tonight, this would be everywhere. Ethan didn't care. He knelt beside his son, cradling Noah's face in his trembling hands. "Look at me. Can you see me?" Noah's eyes fluttered, pupils dilating and contracting and stuttering, uncoordinated movements, like an old machine trying to remember how to function. I don't know," the boy whispered. "There's light, but it's all mixed up. Like puzzle pieces that don't fit yet." Ethan's throat closed. He pulled Noah close, feeling the boy's small body trembling against his chest. Then he noticed it. The pendant. It still hung from Annika's neck, catching the late afternoon sun. But now that he was really looking, Ethan could see it wasn't just jewelry. The golden surface was etched with patterns too precise to be decorative. Concentric circles radiating from a central stone that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The shape was unmistakable. An eye. Ancient. Deliberate. That thing, Ethan said, pointing. What is it? Annika's hand moved protectively to the pendant. Not a weapon. If that's what you're thinking. Then what? She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the golden eye. Hope, she said finally. For people who've been told hope doesn't exist. Martinez stepped closer, his hand extended. Sir, we need to confiscate that item for analysis. If it's emitting radiation or... Don't touch it, Noah said suddenly, his voice stronger now. Everyone froze. The boy turned his head toward Annika with startling precision, as if he could sense her location even if he couldn't fully see her. She's not dangerous, Noah said. She's warm, like sunlight. Ethan stared at his son, then at Annika, then at the pendant. His entire worldview built on logic, peer-reviewed studies, and empirical evidence was cracking like ice under pressure. Come with us, he said to Annika. Please, I need to understand this. The drive home was silent except for Noah's soft, wonder-filled murmurs. He sat in the back seat, hands pressed to the window, face turned toward the passing streetlights. Every flash seemed to send ripples of excitement through him. Dad, are those stars? He asked, pointing at the city lights. No, buddy. Those are buildings. Stars are higher up. Oh, pause. But they're beautiful anyway. Ethan's vision blurred. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Beside him in the passenger seat, Annika sat quietly, the pendant now tucked beneath her collar. Security had wanted to follow them home, but Ethan had dismissed them. For the first time in years, he didn't want bodyguards. He didn't want witnesses. He wanted answers. At the Anderson estate, Noah refused to go to his room. He wandered from window to window, touching the glass, describing what he saw or thought he saw. There's purple? He said uncertainly, pointing at the twilight sky. But it's mixing with orange. And the trees, they're like shadows, but not scary. They're peaceful. Ethan watched, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Joy, terror, disbelief. How is this possible? He muttered. Annika stood near the doorway, arms crossed. You're a man of science, Mr. Anderson. Don't you believe in what you can measure? I believe in what I can prove. Then prove it. 20 minutes later, Ethan was on the phone with Dr. Simmons, his lead neurologist at Anderson Biotech's research wing. I need an emergency neural scan. Tonight. My son. His voice cracked. He's seeing Simmons. Or something close to it. That's not medically possible, Ethan. We've mapped Noah's neural pathways a dozen times. His visual cortex has been dormant since. I don't care what the previous scans showed, Ethan snapped. Get your equipment here. Now. By 9 p.m., Dr. Simmons arrived with a portable EEG and fMRI interface compact units designed for home diagnostics. The equipment hummed to life in Noah's bedroom, electrodes carefully placed across the boy's scalp. Noah sat still, surprisingly calm, as the machines began their work. Annika watched from the corner, silent as a shadow. Ethan stood beside Simmons, staring at the monitor as data streams began to populate the screen. Neural activity, brainwave patterns, blood flow mapping. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then, wait, Simmons whispered. Wait, that's not possible. On the screen, the visual cortex, the region responsible for processing sight, lit up. Not fully, not like a typical sighted person. But there were pulses, flickers of activity. Neurons firing in patterns that shouldn't exist. My God, Simmons breathed. There's neural plasticity occurring in real time. His brain it's rebuilding pathways, creating new connections where there should be none. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. You said his optic nerves were underdeveloped. That sight was impossible. They are. Simmons turned, his face pale. Ethan, this doesn't make sense. Neural regeneration at this scale, we're talking about spontaneous neurogenesis that defies every model we have. Then your models are wrong. Or, something else is happening here. Simmons glanced at Annika. Something we don't understand. Noah yawned, oblivious to the scientific crisis unfolding around him. Dad, I'm tired. Can I sleep now? Ethan's voice softened. Of course, buddy. As they removed the electrodes and Noah settled into bed, Simmons pulled Ethan aside. I need to run more tests. Bring him to the lab tomorrow. This could be... No. Ethan's voice was firm. No labs. Not yet. But this is groundbreaking. If we can understand what's triggering this neuroplasticity, we could... I said no. Simmons stared at him, confused. Since when do you turn away from scientific discovery? Ethan looked through the doorway at his son, now curled up beneath the covers, a faint smile on his lips. Since I realized some things are more important than discovery, he said quietly. After Simmons left, Ethan found Anika standing on the balcony, gazing at the city lights below. "You knew," he said. "You knew this would happen." She didn't turn around. "I hoped." "That's not good enough. I need to understand. What is that pendant? Why does it work? How does it work?" Anika was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years. "Because some things can't be explained, Mr. Anderson. Only witnessed. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have tonight." She turned to face him, and in the dim light, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Your son is waking up to a world he's never known," she said. "Tomorrow, you can chase your explanations. Tonight, just let him feel the light." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, to demand more, to control something in a situation that made no sense. But the words died in his throat, because behind him, through the open door, he could hear Noah's voice, soft and drowsy. "Dad, I think I saw colors in my dreams tonight." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Anderson, builder of empires, master of machines, believer in only what could be measured, stood in the presence of something that shattered every certainty he'd ever held. By morning, the first news articles would break. By noon, Anderson Biotech stock would surge. And by evening, Ethan would discover the truth buried in Project VS-07. A truth that would prove Anika right. Some things aren't broken by God. They're broken by men who play God. And the only way to fix them is to remember what it means to be human. The morning came too fast. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study, staring at neural scans on his laptop, searching for rational explanations that refused to appear. Every medical journal, every research paper, every experimental trial, none of it explained what had happened in his courtyard. By 6 a.m., his phone was flooded with messages. Board members demanding explanations, news outlets requesting interviews, Dr. Kellerman's carefully worded email suggesting they control the narrative before it controls us. But Ethan ignored them all, because there was only one person who had answers. And she was somewhere in the bowels of Anderson Tower, mopping floors like she hadn't just shattered the laws of medical science. He found her in the maintenance wing, 3 floors below ground level. The air down here smelled of industrial cleaner and concrete. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, sterile glow. It was a part of the building he'd never visited, a world beneath his empire that he'd never thought to see. Anika stood at the far end of the corridor, her back to him, pushing a mop across the tile floor in slow, methodical strokes. Her blue scrubs were the same ones from yesterday. The pendant was tucked out of sight. She didn't turn around, but somehow, Ethan knew she'd heard him approach. "You've been looking for me," she said quietly. "For 3 hours." His voice echoed in the empty hallway. "Security said you clocked in at 5 a.m., like it was just another day." "It is just another day. Don't." Ethan's voice sharpened. "Don't pretend yesterday didn't happen." Anika paused, wringing out the mop into the bucket. Water dripped in a steady rhythm, the only sound besides their breathing. "I'm not pretending anything, Mr. Anderson," she said. "I'm working. Some of us still have to." The words landed like a slap. Ethan stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Tell me what you did to my son." "I already told you." "No." He cut her off, his frustration boiling over. "No vague answers, no mystical non-explanations. I want the truth. What is that pendant? What kind of technology are you using? Who sent you?" Anika finally turned to face him, and the look in her eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It was pity. "You think someone sent me?" she asked softly. "You think this is corporate espionage? A PR stunt? I think you're hiding something. And I think you know exactly what happened to my son." "You're right." She set the mop against the wall, crossing her arms. "I do know. Because I've seen it before." Ethan's pulse quickened. Seen what? Blindness that wasn't supposed to exist. The hallway seemed to narrow, the walls pressing in. Anika stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "You want to buy everything you can't understand, Mr. Anderson. You want to dissect it, patent it, control it. But some things can't be bought. I'm not trying to buy anything." "Then why are you here?" Her voice rose, sharp and sudden. "Why aren't you upstairs celebrating? Your son can see. For the first time in his life, he's experiencing light. But instead of being with him, you're down here, interrogating the janitor." The accusation hit harder than it should have. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the words tangled in his throat. She was right. Noah was upstairs, probably awake by now, describing colors to the housekeeper, asking questions about shadows and sunlight. And Ethan was down here, chasing answers instead of witnessing the miracle. "I need to understand," he said, quieter now. "I need to know this is real, that it's not going to disappear." Anika's expression softened, just slightly. "You want to know why I can do what your doctors couldn't?" she asked. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. She reached into her collar and pulled out the pendant, letting it hang in the harsh fluorescent light. Up close, he could see the craftsmanship, intricate etchings, a crystalline center that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence. "This isn't magic, Mr. Anderson. It's science. Just not the kind you're used to. Explain it to me. I was a neuroscience student once, she said, her voice distant now, like she was pulling the words from somewhere deep and painful. Johns Hopkins. Full scholarship. I was going to change the world. Ethan blinked. You're a scientist? Was. The word was bitter. Before everything fell apart, she turned the pendant over in her fingers, the light catching on its surface. My brother Marcus was brilliant. Smarter than me, actually. He got recruited by a biotech company right out of grad school. Cutting-edge neural research, experimental treatments, the works. He thought he was going to help people. Her voice cracked. Instead, they used him as a test subject. Ethan's blood ran cold. They told him it was routine. A trial for a new neural inhibitor, temporary, reversible, perfectly safe. But something went wrong. The inhibitor didn't reverse. It locked. Marcus went blind in 3 days. My God. He tried to report it. Tried to expose what they'd done. But the company buried it. Called it a pre-existing condition. Paid off the hospital. By the time I found out, Marcus had already... She stopped, swallowing hard. He took his own life 6 months later. The hallway felt suffocating. Ethan's mind raced, trying to place the story, trying to remember if he'd ever heard. What company? He asked, though part of him already knew. Annika met his eyes, and there was no pity left in her gaze now. Only steel. Anderson Biotech. The world tilted. No, Ethan said immediately. No, we have protocols, ethics boards. That's not we would never. You did. Her voice was calm. Final. 7 years ago. Neural suppression trials. Experimental funding. They promised Marcus it would change medicine. Instead, it destroyed him. I would have known. Would you? She stepped closer, and Ethan found himself backing up against the wall. How many projects do you oversee, Mr. Anderson? How many files do you sign without reading? How many people become data points in reports you never see? His breath came shallow. Marcus spent his last months trying to finish his research. Anika continued. Trying to find a cure for what your company did to him. That pendant? She lifted it. It's made from his work. Neurocrystal synthesis. A mineral compound that can stimulate dormant neural pathways through resonant frequency. Ethan stared at the pendant, his mind reeling. He called it the key to unlocking stolen sight. Annika said softly. He never got to test it. But I did. I took a job here 7 years ago. Cleaned your floors. Watched your people. Waited. For what? For someone who needed what Marcus couldn't give himself. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. If this is true, Ethan said slowly. If your brother really, why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you sue you? Anika's laugh was hollow. With what lawyer? What evidence? Your company made sure everything disappeared. So I did what I could. I kept my brother's work alive. And I waited for a chance to use it. Ethan's hands trembled. What was the project called? Your brother's trial? Anika's eyes locked onto his. Project VS-07. The designation hit him like a bullet. Project VS-07. Visual Suppression Trial 07. He'd seen that code before. Years ago. Buried in quarterly funding reports. Early-stage research proposals. Files he'd signed off on without a second glance. No, he whispered. Yes. I would have remembered. You signed it, Mr. Anderson. Her voice was quiet. Devastating. Your name is on the approval documents. I've seen them. Ethan's vision blurred. The hallway spun. I need to see those files, he said hoarsely. They're encrypted. Hidden in your own archives. Then help me find them. Anika studied him for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't read. Why should I? She asked. So you can bury them again? No. Ethan's voice broke. So I can know if I'm the reason my son was born blind. The words hung in the air like a confession. Anika's expression shifted surprise, then something close to understanding. Your son? She whispered. Noah was part of a prenatal study. Advanced genetic screening. I was told it was routine. But if Project VS-07 was still active when he was born, he couldn't finish the sentence. Anika's eyes widened, realization dawning. You think they used it on him? I don't know. Ethan's voice was barely audible. But I need to find out. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Anika reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. My brother kept backups, she said. Pieces of the original research. It's not everything, but it's a start. Ethan took it with shaking hands. If you're looking for Project VS-07, Anika said quietly, start with your own signature. As Ethan turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Mr. Anderson? He looked back. When you find the truth, she said, don't run from it. That's what killed my brother. Not the blindness, the silence. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Then he walked back toward the elevator, the flash drive burning like a brand in his palm. Behind him, Anika returned to her mop, the sound of water against tile echoing through the empty corridor. But everything had changed. The blindness in Noah's eyes might have been an accident, but the blindness in his father's heart, that was a choice. And now, Ethan Anderson was about to discover just how much that choice had cost. The flash drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Ethan sat alone in his private office on the 42nd floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board of light and ambition. His hands trembled as he inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered. A folder appeared. Marcus. Backup. Files. Inside were fragments, research notes, neural pathway diagrams, encrypted correspondence. But one document stood out, highlighted in red. Archive. Access. Codes. TXT. Ethan opened it. A list of passwords and server locations filled the screen. Locations within Anderson Biotech's own database, deep in the encrypted medical archives that even most executives couldn't access. But Ethan could. He was the founder, the architect of this empire. Every door in this building was supposed to open for him. He just never thought to ask what was hidden behind them. 20 minutes later, Ethan stood in the sub-level data center, a climate-controlled vault housing decades of research files. Servers hummed like sleeping giants, their lights blinking in rhythmic patterns. He logged in using his executive credentials, his fingers moving across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Anderson Biotech Medical Archives restricted access. Enter authorization code. He typed the code from Marcus's files. The screen hesitated. Processing. Then, access granted. A new directory opened, filled with project folders labeled with clinical designations. NI04, VS03, NS11. And there, near the bottom, Project. VS07. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He clicked. The folder was massive, hundreds of files spanning years. Medical reports, trial protocols, consent forms, budget allocations, and photos. Ethan scrolled through images of infants, their faces blurred for privacy, ID numbers stamped across the bottom. Test subjects in a study he didn't remember authorizing, but he must have. Because there, in the project overview, was a signature. His signature. Authorized by Ethan Anderson, CEO. Date. The 12th of November 2015. His vision blurred. He opened the project summary, his hands shaking so badly he could barely control the mouse. Project vs. 07. Visual suppression trial. Objective. Test long-term efficacy of neural inhibitor BN 47 inches prenatal and neonatal subjects to assess reversibility windows and develop marketable therapeutic applications. Trial parameters. 12 subjects. Ages 0 to 6 months. Controlled suppression of optical nerve development. Expected duration. 24 to 36 months before reversal protocol. Funding justification. High-profile cases with significant media potential will accelerate public interest and investment opportunities. Ethan stopped breathing. High-profile cases. Media potential. He scrolled faster, desperation clawing at his throat. Then he found it. Subject roster trial group A. His eyes scanned the list of names most redacted, replaced with ID numbers. Except one. Subject 07. Noah Ethan Anderson. Dob. The 3rd of April 2015. Trial start date. The 10th of April 2015. Status. Active suppression maintained. Parental consent. Pre-authorized per executive waiver. The world shattered. Ethan's chair rolled backward as he stood, stumbling, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Noah. His son. Subject 07. The room spun. His hands found the edge of the desk, gripping it to keep from collapsing. They hadn't just tested the neural inhibitor on random subjects. They'd used his son, and he'd signed off on it. Pre-authorized per executive waiver. The words burned into his mind like a brand. He clicked deeper into the files, frantic now, searching for anything that would make this make sense. And then he found the internal memo. From Dr. Richard Kellerman. T. Project VS07 Research Team. Date. The 30th of March 2015. Subject. High-value subject acquisition. Team. We've secured Subject 07 CEO's son, born premature with minor complications. Father has authorized advanced prenatal care protocol under proprietary NDA. He will not be informed of trial inclusion. This is exactly the visibility we need. A billionaire's blind child undergoing experimental treatment will generate unprecedented media coverage and investor confidence. Maintain suppression for minimum 10 years to maximize impact of future breakthrough reversal. Public perception. We tried everything. Reality. We controlled everything. Proceed with standard dosing. Document all progress. And remember, this stays buried until I give the word. RK. Ethan's stomach heaved. He collapsed into the chair, his body convulsing with rage and horror. They used Noah as bait. They blinded his son on purpose to create a story worth selling. For 10 years, he'd believed his son's blindness was a cruel twist of fate, a genetic anomaly, an act of God. But it wasn't. It was an act of men. Men he trusted, men he paid, men he called colleagues. And the worst part, the part that made him want to tear his own skin off, was that he'd signed the papers. He hadn't read them, hadn't questioned them. He'd been too busy building his empire, chasing deals, changing the world. So he'd signed. And his son had paid the price. Ethan didn't remember leaving the data center. He didn't remember taking the elevator. But suddenly he was standing outside Dr. Kellerman's office on the 38th floor, his hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Dr. Richard Kellerman looked up from his desk, startled, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, the face of Anderson Biotech's medical division. The man who'd held Noah as an infant and promised everything would be okay. "Ethan," Kellerman said, rising smoothly. "I wasn't expecting. Project VS-07. Ethan's voice was barely recognizable. "Tell me it's not real." Kellerman's expression didn't change, not even a flicker. And that's when Ethan knew. "Sit down," Kellerman said calmly. "Let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" Ethan's voice exploded. "You blinded my son. You turned him into a test subject for publicity. Lower your voice." "No." Ethan slammed his hand on the desk, sending papers flying. "You don't get to tell me what to do. Not anymore." Kellerman sighed, removing his glasses and folding them carefully. "Ethan, you're upset. I understand. But you're not seeing the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" Ethan's laugh was unhinged. "My son couldn't see for 10 years because of you." "Because of us," Kellerman corrected, his voice maddeningly calm. "You signed the authorization, Ethan. You approved the trial. I didn't know. You didn't ask." Kellerman stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "You wanted cutting-edge research. You wanted breakthroughs that would dominate the market. And you wanted them fast. So we delivered. By using my son as a lab rat? By creating an opportunity," Kellerman said coldly. "Noah's condition gave this company leverage, sympathy, a narrative. Billionaire CEO fights to cure his blind son. Do you have any idea how much funding that story generated?" Ethan's vision went red. "He's not a story. He's my child. He's both." Kellerman's eyes were ice. "And you knew that when you built this company. You wanted headlines, Ethan. I just made sure you got them." The words landed like a blade between ribs. "You're a monster," Ethan whispered. "No." Kellerman's smile was thin. "I'm a pragmatist, and for 10 years you were too. Don't pretend you suddenly found a conscience just because you finally read the fine print." Ethan lunged. His hands found Kellerman's collar, slamming the older man against the bookshelf. Medical texts and awards crashed to the floor. "You destroyed him!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. "You stole his childhood, his sight, for money." Kellerman didn't struggle. He just stared, unmoved. "And yet," he said quietly, "here you are. Still rich, still powerful, still untouchable. Because that's what we built together, Ethan. An empire where men like us don't face consequences." The truth of it hit harder than any punch could. Ethan's grip loosened. He stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. "Not anymore," he whispered. Kellerman straightened his jacket, his expression unreadable. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Go to the media? Destroy your own company? Admit to the world that you experimented on your own son?" Ethan said nothing. Because Kellerman was right. If he exposed the truth, he didn't just destroy Anderson Biotech. He destroyed himself, his legacy, his reputation, his entire life's work. And maybe that's exactly what he deserved. Ethan walked out of the office without another word. Behind him, Kellerman returned to his desk, already making calls, already controlling the damage. But Ethan didn't care anymore. Because as he stood in the elevator, descending toward the ground floor, he finally understood what Annika had been trying to tell him. The blindness was never just in Noah's eyes. It was in his father's heart. And the only way to fix it, to truly heal, was to tear down everything he'd built, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Ethan found her where he knew she'd be. In the maintenance wing, 3 floors below the empire he'd built on lies. But this time, she wasn't mopping. She sat on an overturned bucket in the corner, the pendant in her hands, turning it slowly beneath the fluorescent light, like she'd been waiting for him. She looked up as his footsteps echoed down the corridor. One glance at his face told her everything. "You found it," she said quietly. Ethan's legs gave out. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold concrete floor, his expensive suit crumpling around him like paper. "Noah," he whispered, his voice broken. "They used Noah." Annika said nothing, just watched him unravel. Subject 07. The words tasted like poison. "That was my son. They blinded him. On purpose. For funding. For a story they could sell." His hands covered his face, and for the first time in decades, Ethan Anderson, billionaire, visionary, master of his universe, wept. Great, heaving sobs that echoed in the empty hallway. Annika rose slowly, crossing the distance between them. She knelt beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "I know," she said softly. "You knew?" His head snapped up, eyes red and wild. You knew what they did to him? I suspected. Her voice was steady. When I saw him in that courtyard, I recognized the signs. The specific pattern of neural suppression. The same kind that killed my brother. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? She asked. Before you saw the files yourself? Before you faced the truth? Ethan had no answer. She was right. He would have called security. Would have had her arrested for slander. Because 3 days ago, he was still a man who believed in the goodness of his empire. Now he was just a man drowning in the wreckage of his own blindness. How do I fix this? He asked, his voice cracking. How do I undo 10 years of... You can't. Anika's words were gentle but final. You can't give him back the childhood he lost. The moments he never saw. But you can give him a future. How? That pendant, what you did, Kellerman will bury it. He'll destroy the evidence, pay off anyone who knows, and Noah will. The pendant isn't something Kellerman can bury, Anika interrupted. Because it doesn't exist in his world. She held it up, the golden eye catching the light, its crystalline center pulsing with that strange, soft luminescence. Tell me what it is, Ethan said. Please. No more riddles. I need to understand. Anika studied him for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't read. Then she nodded. Neurocrystal, she said. Marcus discovered it by accident. Anika began, her voice taking on the cadence of a story told many times in the dark. He was working on neural resonance mapping, trying to find ways to stimulate damaged pathways using electromagnetic frequencies. Ethan listened, his breathing slowly steadying. Standard research, at first. But then he found something in the data that shouldn't exist. A mineral compound from deep geological samples, brought up during an unrelated mining survey. When exposed to specific frequencies, it didn't just conduct electricity, it amplified bioelectric signals. Amplified how? By resonance. Anika turned the pendant over in her palm. Every neuron in your brain communicates through electrical impulses. When those pathways are damaged or suppressed, the signals can't get through. But neurocrystal, she held it up, acts like a tuning fork. It picks up the brain's natural frequency and amplifies it, helping dormant neurons reconnect. Ethan's mind raced, trying to reconcile the science with what he'd witnessed. That's not possible. Neural regeneration doesn't work that way. You can't just turn on dead pathways. They're not dead, Anika corrected. They're suppressed. There's a difference. Marcus proved it. He showed that neurons don't disappear, they go dormant, waiting for the right signal to wake them up. She leaned closer, her eyes intense. Your son's visual cortex was never broken, Mr. Anderson. It was silenced. The neural inhibitor your company used, it didn't destroy his optic nerves. It put them to sleep. And neurocrystal is the alarm clock. The explanation hung in the air. Half science, half miracle. If this works, Ethan said slowly, if it can reverse neural suppression, why isn't it everywhere? Why isn't every hospital using it? Anika's expression darkened. Because Anderson Biotech owns the patent. The words landed like a punch to the gut. What? When Marcus presented his findings, your company didn't celebrate. They confiscated his research, called it proprietary intellectual property. They saw what he'd discovered, and realized it could cure the very conditions they were profiting from. No. Yes. Her voice was steel. They patented the neurocrystal synthesis process, locked it behind NDAs and classified research protocols. Then they buried it. Why? Because a cure ends the treatment cycle, Anika said bitterly. Your company makes billions on ongoing therapies. Neural implants, synthetic optics, lifetime medication regimens. But a one-time cure? She shook her head. That's not profitable. Ethan felt the walls closing in. Marcus tried to go public. Anika continued. He tried to expose what they'd done. But before he could, there was an accident in the lab. A chemical exposure. They said it was his fault. Careless handling of volatile compounds. Her voice cracked. He went blind in 3 days. And 3 months later, he was dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. This pendant, Anika whispered, touching it like a sacred relic, is all I have left of him. He made it in secret, using the last samples he could steal before they locked him out. He never got to test it, but he left me his notes, his research, his hope. She looked up at Ethan, tears glistening. When I saw Noah, I saw Marcus, another victim of your company's greed. So I used the one thing they couldn't take from me. The pendant. The truth, she corrected. I didn't give your son sight, Mr. Anderson. Her words were quiet, devastating. I gave back what you stole. The accusation should have made him angry, should have made him defensive. But all Ethan felt was the crushing weight of truth. He stared at the pendant, this impossible fusion of science and sacrifice, technology and tragedy, the key to his son's healing, forged from his company's sins. I didn't know, he whispered. I believe you, Anika said. But that doesn't change what happened. Ethan's hands trembled. His entire worldview, everything he'd built his identity on, was crumbling. Science was supposed to heal. Progress was supposed to help. But he'd weaponized both. "Teach me," he said suddenly. Anika blinked. "What?" "Teach me about the neurocrystal, how it works, how to synthesize it, how to—" His voice broke. "How to fix what I've broken." "Mr. Anderson." "No." He looked up at her, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his eyes. No calculation. Just raw, desperate humanity. "No more, Mr. Anderson. I'm not a CEO right now. I'm not a billionaire." Slowly, deliberately, Ethan shifted forward. And knelt. On the concrete floor of the maintenance wing, in his $1,000 suit, the founder of a multi-billion-dollar empire knelt before a janitor. "I'm a father," he said, his voice breaking. "A father who failed his son. And I'm begging you not as someone trying to buy your help, but as someone who has nothing left to offer but the truth." He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "Help me make this right, please." Anika stared at him, shock flickering across her features. She'd spent 7 years invisible in these halls. 7 years cleaning the floors of men who never saw her, who never knew her name, and now one of them was kneeling before her, broken and human and real. She reached down, her hand trembling, and placed the pendant in his palm. "It's not about making it right," she said softly. "It's about finally learning to see." The pendant glowed between them, its light reflecting in both their eyes. And in that moment, in a basement corridor beneath an empire built on blindness, 2 people began the long, painful work of opening their eyes. Ethan moved fast. By midnight, he'd copied every file from Project VS-07 onto 3 separate drives. By 2 a.m., he'd contacted an investigative journalist at the Washington Post. By 4 a.m., he drafted a company-wide memo exposing the trial and demanding a full external audit. By 6 a.m., everything had disappeared. He stared at his laptop screen, refreshing frantically. The files were gone, deleted from the server, scrubbed from the backups. Even his local copies had been remotely wiped. Security protocols he'd authorized years ago, now turned against him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop, now, or everyone learns what you signed." Ethan's blood ran cold. A second message arrived, an attachment. He opened it with trembling hands. It was a document. A consent form dated April 2015, authorizing experimental prenatal treatment protocol for heir apparent. His signature at the bottom, bold and clear. But the wording heir apparent, he'd never written that. This version was different from what he remembered signing. Altered. Designed to make him look complicit. Intentional. A third message. "We protected you for 10 years. Don't make us stop now. R.K. Kellerman." Ethan drove to Anderson Tower as dawn broke over the city. The security guard at the front desk looked uncomfortable when he swiped his keycard. "Access denied." "There must be a mistake," Ethan said, trying again. "Access denied." "Sir," the guard said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I have orders. You're not permitted in the building pending an internal review." "An internal review?" Ethan's voice rose. "I own this company." "Not anymore, sir." The guard gestured toward the street. "Board vote happened an hour ago. Emergency session. You've been temporarily removed as CEO for health and stress-related concerns." The world tilted. "Kellerman," Ethan whispered. The guard said nothing. But his silence was answer enough. By noon, the media had the story, but not the one Ethan wanted. Anderson Biotech CEO takes leave amid mental health concerns. Ethan Anderson steps down following family crisis. Sources close to Billionaire cite erratic behavior and paranoid delusions. They'd spun it perfectly, turned him into the problem. The unstable father, cracking under pressure, making wild accusations against his own company. Ethan sat in his home office, watching his empire dismantle him in real time. His phone rang. A board member, then another, then 5 more. Each one with the same message. "Take the severance, walk away, or we release the files showing you authorized experiments on your own son." They had him cornered. If he fought, they'd destroy him publicly. If he stayed silent, they'd bury the truth forever. "Dad?" Ethan looked up. Noah stood in the doorway, Anika beside him. The boy's eyes were clearer now, still unfocused, still adjusting, but seeing. Shapes, light, movement. "Hey, buddy," Ethan forced a smile. "What are you doing up?" "I had another dream," Noah said, his voice uncertain. "But I don't think it was a dream." Ethan exchanged a glance with Anika, who stepped forward, her expression troubled. "He's been having them since yesterday," she said quietly. "Visions. While he's awake." "Visions of what?" Noah moved closer, his small hands reaching for his father. "A man. With kind hands. He's working with something bright, like stars you can hold." Ethan's chest tightened. "What else do you see?" "His face." Noah's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's glowing. Golden light, just like the pendant. And he's sad, Dad. He's trying to fix something, but it keeps breaking." Anika's breath hitched. "Marcus," she whispered. Noah turned toward her voice, his eyes tracking her movement with startling precision. Is that his name? The man with the light? Yes. Anika knelt beside him, her voice trembling. That's my brother, but sweetheart, he died before you were born. How could you? I see him when the pendant gets warm, Noah said simply. Like he's still here, still trying to help. Silence filled the room. Ethan's rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Hallucinations, side effects, neural misfiring. But the father in him, the part awakening after a decade of sleep, knew better. The neurocrystal, he said slowly. You said it amplifies bioelectric signals. Could it carry more than just neural impulses? Anika's eyes widened. You think it's storing memory? Not storing, echoing. Ethan stood, his mind racing through the implications. If the crystal resonates with brain activity, and your brother spent months working with it, pouring his consciousness into the research, then pieces of him might still be in it. Anika finished, her voice awed and horrified. They both looked at Noah, who stood quietly, his small hand touching the pendant around Anika's neck. He wants you to know something, Noah said. What? Anika's voice broke. That he's not angry. He's proud. And Noah tilted his head, listening to something they couldn't hear. He says the truth is in the light. Always was. That night, Ethan and Anika sat in his study, the pendant on the desk between them, glowing faintly in the darkness. They've locked me out, Ethan said. Deleted the evidence. Turned the board against me. If I push any harder, they'll bury me in the truth. Then we don't push, Anika said. What? She picked up the pendant, its light reflecting in her determined eyes. Kellerman thinks he's won because he controls the narrative, the files, the media, but he doesn't control this. A pendant isn't evidence. It's not just a pendant. She leaned forward. It's proof. Living, breathing proof that the neurocrystal works, that Marcus's research was real, that your son's healing wasn't a miracle, it was theft recovered. Ethan began to understand. You want to go public, demonstrate it. Not just demonstrate, broadcast. Her voice gained intensity. Noah's visions, the neural scans showing his cortex waking up, the pendant's resonance frequency, we document everything. We show the world what this technology can do. Kellerman will claim it's fake, staged. Then we do it live. Anika's smile was fierce. In front of witnesses, medical professionals, cameras. We make it impossible to deny. They'll come after us. They're already coming after you. Ethan stared at the pendant, watching its hypnotic pulse. She was right. He had nothing left to lose. His company had turned against him. His reputation was being dismantled. His fortune meant nothing if his son's truth stayed buried. Where? He asked. The hospital, Anika said. Where this started. Where they first diagnosed Noah as irreversibly blind. We go back there and show them exactly how reversible it was. And if it doesn't work? If Noah's healing was temporary, or, it will work, Anika said with absolute certainty. Because Marcus built this to help, not to profit. That's the difference between us and them. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd lost everything to his company's greed, who'd spent 7 years invisible and waiting, who'd given his son back the one thing money couldn't buy. Why are you doing this? He asked. You could walk away, take the pendant, disappear. You don't owe me anything. Anika met his gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Because Marcus didn't die so the truth could stay buried, she said softly. And your son didn't survive 10 years of darkness so we could let them win. She held out her hand. Are you with me? Ethan looked at her hand, calloused from years of janitorial work, trembling slightly, but extended with absolute trust. Then he took it. I'm with you. Upstairs, Noah sat by his window, the world still a blur of shapes and colors he was learning to name. But in his mind, clear as crystal, he saw the man with kind hands, Marcus, smiling in golden light, and beside him, a message that Noah didn't fully understand yet but knew he would. Tell them the light always remembers, and truth always sees. By morning, Ethan Anderson would do something he'd never done before. He would stop trying to control the narrative, and start trusting the light to speak for itself, even if it meant burning down everything he'd built to let the truth finally shine through. The war for truth had begun, and this time, the weapons weren't money or power. They were compassion, courage, and a pendant that carried the echo of a man who died believing sight belonged to everyone, not just those who could afford to see. They arrived at Anderson Biotech at 10 a.m., when the board meeting was scheduled. Ethan didn't call ahead, didn't ask permission. He simply walked through the front doors with Anika on one side, Noah on the other, and dared anyone to stop him. Security noticed immediately. Mr. Anderson, the desk guard said, rising. Sir, you're not authorized. I built this building, Ethan said, not slowing. Every brick, every window. I'm authorized. He headed straight for the elevators, Anika and Noah following in his wake. Sir, I need to call this in. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the protest. The 38th floor was pristine, corporate. all glass walls and polished steel. The executive boardroom sat at the far end, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city Ethan had once believed he owned. Through the glass, he could see them. The board members, 12 of them, seated around the long table. Dr. Kellerman at the head, mid-presentation, gesture confident. Ethan didn't knock. He threw open the doors. 12 heads turned. Kellerman's hand froze mid-gesture, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation in an instant. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "this is a closed session. You'll need to—" "Shut up." Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Gasps rippled around the table. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one spoke to Dr. Kellerman that way. Ethan strode to the center of the room, Noah's wheelchair rolling beside him, Anika flanking them like a silent guardian. "This ends now," Ethan said. Kellerman's smile was thin. "Security is already on their way. I suggest, let them come." Ethan turned to face the board. "You all need to hear this. Mr. Anderson," one of the board members, Patricia Chen, CFO, spoke up nervously. "You're not well. We all understand the stress you've been under." "I'm not stressed," Ethan interrupted. "I'm awake. For the first time in 10 years. The doors burst open. 6 security guards poured in, radios crackling. "Restrain them," Kellerman ordered. The guards moved forward, but Ethan raised his hand. "Touch my son," he said quietly, "and I will burn this company to the ground and everyone in this room with it." Something in his voice, raw, unhinged, certain, made them hesitate. "Stand down," Patricia said quickly. "Let him speak." Kellerman's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. The guards remained at the doors, blocking the exit. Ethan turned back to the board. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I signed documents I didn't read, approved projects I didn't understand, built an empire on the promise that we were helping people." He pulled out a folder from inside his jacket and threw it on the table. Papers scattered across the polished surface. "Project VS-07, he said. "Visual suppression trial. Does anyone here know what that is?" Silence. "No?" Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Let me enlighten you. It was an experiment using neural inhibitors to blind children, infants, to test reversibility windows and generate marketable therapeutic applications." Murmurs erupted around the table. "That's classified research," Kellerman said sharply. "You're violating NDAs." "I don't care." Ethan's voice rose. "Because one of those children was my son." Every eye in the room turned to Noah, who sat quietly in his wheelchair, his newly seeing eyes taking in the faces around him with startling clarity. "Subject 07, Ethan continued, his voice breaking. "That's what you called him. Not Noah. Not a child. A subject." Patricia's hand went to her mouth. Other board members paled. "This is absurd," Kellerman said, standing. "Ethan authorized that trial himself. His signature is on." "I signed papers I didn't read," Ethan roared. "I trusted you. I trusted this company. And you used that trust to blind my son for profit." "You wanted headlines," Kellerman shot back, his composure cracking. "You wanted breakthrough technologies that would dominate the market. You wanted to be the visionary CEO who conquered blindness. Well, congratulations, you got your wish. By creating the disease you claim to cure? By creating opportunity." Kellerman's eyes flashed. "You think progress happens without sacrifice? You think medical breakthroughs come from playing it safe? Sacrifice?" Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. "You sacrificed my son. I sacrificed nothing." Kellerman stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You signed those documents. You approved the funding. You looked the other way while we did what needed to be done. Don't stand here now and pretend you're innocent." The accusation hung in the air like poison, because it was true. Ethan had signed, had looked away, had chosen ambition over attention. "You're right," he said softly. Kellerman blinked, surprised. "I am guilty." Ethan's voice strengthened. "I blinded my son with my greed, my arrogance, my refusal to see what was happening in my own company." He turned to the board, tears streaming down his face. "But I'm seeing now." He reached for the contracts on the table, the ones with his signature, and began tearing them apart. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the boardroom like thunder. "And I'm done being blind." Kellerman moved to stop him, but Anika stepped forward, the pendant already in her hand. "So are we," she said. She held the pendant high, and suddenly the room filled with golden light. Not reflected, not artificial, radiating from the crystal itself, pulsing with energy that made the air hum. "What is that?" someone gasped. Anika moved to Noah, kneeling beside him. She touched the pendant to his forehead, and the boy's eyes fluttered closed. "What are you doing?" Kellerman demanded. "Security. Watch," Anika commanded. The overhead screens normally used for presentations flickered to life, but they weren't showing slides. They were showing neural activity, live brain scans, impossibly detailed, streaming from Noah's consciousness in real time. The visual cortex lit up like a city at night, neurons firing, pathways connecting, synapses sparking with life. The board stared in stunned silence. How? Patricia whispered. Neurocrystal, Anika said. A mineral your company discovered 7 years ago. A cure for neural suppression that you patented and buried because it wasn't profitable. The neural images on screen intensified. Noah's eyes opened, and for the first time, they focused, truly focused. On faces, on details, on light and shadow and color. My brother died discovering this, Anika continued, her voice ringing with fierce pride. He died trying to expose what you'd done, and you called it an accident. Noah stood shakily, with Ethan's help, and looked directly at Dr. Kellerman. I can see you, the boy said clearly. And you're not as big as you sound. Kellerman's face went white. On the screens, the neural pathways glowed brighter, showing a brain not just healing but thriving. You called this a defect, Anika said, gesturing to Noah. Called blindness irreversible. Called my brother's research unviable. But you were wrong. She held up the pendant, its light reflecting in every face. Light remembers where it belongs. And so does truth. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Kellerman barked orders. Security guards looked to each other, uncertain. But Ethan just watched his son, really watched him, seeing the boy track movement, recognize faces, live in a way he never had before. And he knew. This was it. The moment everything changed. Not because of money or power or corporate maneuvering, but because a janitor with a pendant and a father with nothing left to lose had finally decided to let the light speak for itself. Get them out, Kellerman's voice cracked. Shut it down. But Patricia stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. No. Everyone froze. She looked at the screens, at Noah, at the pendant still glowing in Anika's hand. I want to see the research, she said quietly. All of it. Every file on Project VS-07 and neurocrystal synthesis. Patricia, this is a breach of... I'm calling an emergency vote, Patricia continued, ignoring Kellerman, to remove Dr. Richard Kellerman as head of medical research pending a full investigation. You can't. All in favor? 10 hands rose. Kellerman stood frozen, his empire crumbling in real time. Ethan met his eyes across the room. You blinded my son for profit, he said quietly. But you also blinded yourself. You forgot that some things, the most important things, can never be bought or buried. He placed his hand on Noah's shoulder. They can only be seen. The boardroom was still reeling from Patricia's vote when Noah gasped. His small hands flew to his face, pressing against his eyes as if trying to hold something in or let something out. Noah? Ethan dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair. What's wrong? Does it hurt? No. The boy's voice was trembling with awe. It's getting clearer. The pendant in Anika's hand pulsed brighter, its golden light intensifying with each heartbeat. The neural scans on the overhead screens went wild, pathways firing in cascading patterns, connections forming faster than the imaging system could process. The resonance is amplifying, Anika whispered, her eyes wide. It's feeding off his consciousness. The more he wants to see, the stronger. The pendant flared. Everyone in the room flinched as golden light exploded outward, washing over the walls like liquid sun. Noah's hand slowly lowered from his face. His eyes opened, and for the first time, truly the first time, they focused. Not tracking vague shapes, not following light. Seeing. He blinked, his pupils contracting and dilating in perfect synchronization. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the stunned faces of the board members, the security guards frozen at the doors, the neural images still flickering on the screens. Then his eyes found his father. Noah stared at Ethan like he was witnessing a miracle. His small hand reached out, trembling, and touched his father's face, tracing the lines around his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the tears streaming down his cheeks. Dad, Noah whispered, his voice filled with wonder. You're tall. The words, so simple, so innocent, shattered Ethan completely. He collapsed forward, pulling his son into his arms, great heaving sobs racking his body. 10 years of guilt, grief, and helplessness poured out in waves. I'm so sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry. Why are you crying? Noah asked, his new sight showing him his father's pain for the first time. I can see you now. You should be happy. I am, Ethan whispered through his tears. I am. The boardroom had gone completely silent. Even Kellerman stood frozen, his face ashen. Patricia wiped at her eyes. Another board member openly wept. Because they were witnessing something money couldn't buy. Something science alone couldn't explain. They were witnessing restoration. Then the sirens started. Distant at first, but growing louder. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. One of the security guards spoke into his radio. We've got emergency services inbound. Someone triggered the biohazard protocol. All eyes turned to Kellerman, whose hand was still hovering over the emergency panel on the wall. You called them? Patricia's voice was ice. You're actually trying to. That device is unauthorized technology, Kellerman snapped, pointing at the pendant. Emitting unknown radiation in a controlled facility. Protocol demands, Protocol demands you stop destroying lives, Ethan roared, rising to his feet. The pendant blazed brighter, responding to the rising tension. Anika gasped, struggling to hold it as energy coursed through the crystal like lightning through a conduit. It's too much, she said, her voice strained. It's pulling from Noah's neural activity, amplifying it I can't control. The overhead lights flickered. Computer screens glitched. The neural imaging system sparked. Everyone get back, Patricia ordered. The doors burst open. Armed security, not building guards, but corporate tactical teams in full gear flooded into the boardroom. Nobody move, the team leader shouted. We have reports of unauthorized electromagnetic activity. Stay away from them. Ethan positioned himself between the guards and his son, arms spread wide. Anika moved to his side, the pendant now burning so bright it was painful to look at directly. We're not doing anything wrong, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're just showing the truth. Sir, we have orders to confiscate that device and detain anyone. No. The word came from Noah. The boy stood shakily, supported by his father's arm, and faced the armed guards with eyes that could finally see them. You can't take it, Noah said, his young voice ringing with unexpected authority. It's not hurting anyone. It's helping. It helped me. The team leader hesitated, looking at this small boy who was somehow commanding the room. Son, we have protocols. Protocols blinded me, Noah said simply. This gave me sight. Which one matters more? The question hung in the air. The pendant pulsed again, and suddenly every electronic device in the room surged. Laptops sparked, screens flashed, the lights exploded in sequence, raining glass. Someone screamed. The building's power grid groaned under impossible load. And then, everything went dark. Complete blackness. No emergency lights, no exit signs, no ambient glow from the city below. For a moment, there was only silence and shadow. Then, in the darkness, a single point of light. The pendant. It hung suspended in Anika's hand, glowing like a captured star, bathing the boardroom in soft golden radiance. And in that light, Noah stood perfectly still, his eyes wide, his face tilted upward. I can see it, he whispered. All of it. The light expanded not physically, but perceptually, as if Noah's awakening vision was radiating outward, touching everything in the room. Ethan watched, transfixed, as his son slowly turned in a circle, taking in the world with the wonder of someone born into it for the first time. Noah looked at the shattered lights above, the frozen security guards, the board members clutching each other in the darkness. He looked at his father's face, really looked, mapping every detail, every line, every evidence of love and loss and hope. Then he turned to Anika. She knelt there, exhausted, the pendant dimming now as the energy wave subsided. Her face was streaked with tears, her blue scrubs dusty and worn, her hands trembling from the effort of channeling such power. But she was smiling, the most beautiful, broken, triumphant smile Noah had ever seen. And it was the first smile he'd ever truly witnessed. You're glowing, he said softly. Anika laughed through her tears. That's just the light, sweetheart. No. Noah stepped closer, his new sight showing him something others couldn't see. You're glowing, like the pendant, like love looks. The words broke something open in the room. Patricia sobbed openly. One of the security guards lowered his weapon, his face crumbling. Even Kellerman, standing in the shadows, his empire collapsing, looked away, unable to face the purity of what he'd tried to destroy. The pendant's light faded slowly, gently, like the sun setting after a long day. And when it finally dimmed to a soft pulse, the emergency power kicked in, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent light. But it didn't matter, because Noah was still seeing. His eyes adjusted instantly, pupils contracting, processing the brightness with the ease of someone whose vision had been restored, not created. He blinked, looked around at the mess, broken glass, scattered papers, stunned faces, and started to laugh. Pure, joyful, childlike laughter. Everything has colors, he said, spinning in place. Even the boring stuff, even the broken things, everything's so full. Ethan caught him before he spun too far, pulling his son close, feeling the boy's heartbeat against his chest. What do you see? He whispered. Noah pulled back, looking up at his father with eyes that finally saw him. You, he said simply. I see you, Dad, and you're beautiful. Outside, the sirens faded. Inside, the corporate tactical team quietly withdrew, their weapons lowered, their orders suddenly meaningless in the face of what they'd witnessed. Patricia approached Ethan, her voice soft. We're going to make this right, she said. All of it. The research, the cover-up, the victims. I promise you. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. She turned to Anika, extending her hand. Thank you, Patricia said, for not letting us stay blind. Anika took her hand, exhausted but steady. Thank my brother, she said quietly. This was always his light. I just carried it home. As the boardroom slowly emptied, Ethan, Noah, and Anika, stood together in the wreckage of the empire that had tried to bury them. "What now?" Ethan asked. Anika looked at the pendant, now cool and quiet in her palm. "Now," she said. "We make sure everyone can see." Noah took both their hands, squeezing tight. "And we teach them," he added, his voice certain, "that light always remembers where it belongs." In the darkness of a power outage caused by truth, a boy learned to see. And in his seeing, he taught everyone watching what vision really means. Not just the ability to perceive light but the courage to become it. 3 months later, the glass courtyard of Anderson Tower looked the same. But everything had changed. The marble still gleamed under the afternoon sun. The fountain still rippled in the breeze. But the name etched into the building's facade was different now. Project Anika Foundation, Ethical Medical Research and Accessible Cures. Ethan stood at the window of what used to be his executive office, watching people move through the courtyard below. Researchers, patients, families. No more employees in expensive suits, rushing between meetings about profit margins and market dominance. Just people, trying to heal, trying to help, trying to see. The press conference had happened 6 weeks ago. Ethan had stood before cameras from every major network, his hands shaking, his voice steady, and told the truth. All of it. Project VS-07. The neural suppression trials. His son as Subject 07. The buried neurocrystal research. Marcus Johnson's death. The corporate cover-up that had lasted a decade. And his own complicity in signing documents he'd never read, building an empire on suffering he'd never witnessed. "I am guilty," he'd said, his image broadcast across the world. "Not just of negligence, but of moral blindness. I chose ambition over attention, profit over people. And my own son paid the price." The backlash had been immediate and brutal. Lawsuits, investigations, calls for criminal charges. His personal fortune hemorrhaging as victim after victim came forward, people blinded, damaged, destroyed by trials they'd been told were safe. But Ethan didn't run. He liquidated his assets, established a victim compensation fund, opened every archive, fired every executive who'd known, and stayed silent. And then he'd done something unprecedented. He dismantled Anderson Biotech entirely and rebuilt it as a non-profit foundation dedicated to finishing Marcus's work, making neurocrystal therapy available to everyone, and ensuring medical research never again prioritized profit over patients. Patricia Chen had stayed on as director. Several board members had resigned. Kellerman had been arrested, facing multiple charges of fraud, medical malpractice, and conspiracy. The empire Ethan had spent his life building was gone, and he'd never felt freer. "Dad?" Ethan turned from the window. Noah stood in the doorway, no longer in a wheelchair. His vision had stabilized over the past months. Not perfect, but functional. Beautiful. The boy held a tablet, excitement dancing in his eyes that could finally express what his voice had always held. "Dr. Chen said 3 more patients responded to the neurocrystal treatment today," Noah said, crossing the room. "That's 15 this month." Ethan smiled, pulling his son close. "Your mother would be proud. I wish she could have seen this." Noah's voice quieted. "Seen me? Like this?" "She does," Ethan said softly. "Wherever she is, she sees you. I'm sure of it." They stood together, looking out at the courtyard, watching the fountain catch the light. "Is Anika coming today?" Noah asked. Ethan's smile faltered. "I don't know, buddy." Anika had been there through the aftermath, testifying, providing Marcus's research, helping establish the treatment protocols, but she'd refused everything else. The board had wanted to name her chief research officer. Ethan had tried to give her Marcus's share of the foundation. The media had called her a hero, a miracle worker, a savior. She'd declined it all. "I'm not a hero," she'd told Ethan privately. "I'm just someone who refused to let the truth stay buried." Last week, she'd stopped coming to the foundation entirely. Ethan had called, left messages, sent cars to her apartment, but Anika had simply disappeared. Until today. Ethan saw her first, a flash of blue scrubs crossing the courtyard below. His breath caught. "Noah," he said quietly. "Look." They watched as Anika walked slowly through the space where she'd once mopped floors while the empire ignored her. She moved with the same quiet grace. But there was something different now. Lightness. Peace. Ethan didn't think. He just moved. They caught her near the fountain. "Anika!" Noah called, running ahead. She turned, and her face broke into a genuine smile when she saw the boy. She knelt, opening her arms, and Noah crashed into her with a hug that nearly knocked her over. "I've missed you," Noah said into her shoulder. "I've missed you too, sweetheart." Ethan approached more slowly, his throat tight. "You've been avoiding me," he said. Anika stood, her hand resting on Noah's head. "Not avoiding. Just finishing things." "What things?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal, Marcus's notebook, filled with years of research, equations, and dreams. "This belongs here now," she said, handing it to Ethan. Everything he knew about neurocrystal synthesis, neural resonance, treatment protocols, It's all there. The foundation will need it. Anika. I'm leaving, Ethan. The words hit like a physical blow. What? No, you can't. This foundation is yours. You named it after the work, she corrected gently. After the truth. That's what matters. Not me. Where will you go? She smiled, looking around the courtyard with eyes that had seen too much pain and somehow still held hope. Wherever people need someone who knows how to clean up messes, she said. That's what janitors do. Noah grabbed her hand. But you're not a janitor anymore. I'm always going to be a janitor, Noah. She squeezed his hand. Someone who sees what everyone else overlooks. Who cleans up what people leave behind. That's not a job. It's who I am. She looked at Ethan, and in her eyes he saw everything: forgiveness, understanding, and a quiet strength that money could never buy. You're going to do beautiful things here, she said. Both of you. You're going to help people the way Marcus always dreamed of helping. But you don't need me for that anymore. Yes, we do, Ethan's voice cracked. I need to know you're okay. After everything we put you through. I'm okay. She said it simply. Truthfully. For the first time in 7 years. I'm okay. Because the truth is finally free. Marcus's work is finally helping people. And you. She touched his arm gently. You finally learned to see. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. I'm sorry. For all of it. For your brother. For the years you spent invisible. I know. Her smile was sad and beautiful. And I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to the darkness only keeps us blind. She turned to leave. But Noah's voice stopped her. Wait. I want to remember you. Really remember. Let me look. Anika knelt one last time, letting Noah study her face, his new eyes mapping every detail, storing every curve and line and expression. There, he said finally. Now when I close my eyes, I'll still see you. And when I close mine, Anika whispered, I'll see you shining. She kissed his forehead, squeezed Ethan's hand once more, and walked toward the courtyard exit. The afternoon sun caught her blue scrubs, making them glow like the pendant she'd once worn. Ethan and Noah watched until she disappeared into the city, into the world she'd never stopped serving, even when it refused to see her. Dad? Noah asked quietly. Who is she? Really? Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. Someone who saw what I couldn't. That evening, as the sun began its descent, Ethan and Noah returned to the courtyard, the same place where everything had changed, where a janitor had knelt before a blind boy and shattered the laws of corporate greed with nothing but compassion and courage. They sat on the bench where Noah had once waited, unseeing, while his father chased deals that meant nothing. But now, the boy looked up, his eyes tracking the colors bleeding across the sky. Dad, Noah breathed. Is that what sunset always looks like? Yes. Noah struggled for words. It's like the sky is crying gold, and purple, and pink, all at the same time. Ethan watched his son experience wonder, and finally understood. The real blindness had never been in Noah's eyes. It had been in his own heart, in every contract signed without reading, every person unseen, every truth ignored, every moment he'd chosen empire over empathy. Noah had been born with eyes that couldn't see light, but Ethan had chosen to live with a heart that couldn't see people. Dad? Noah leaned against him. Are you happy? Ethan looked at the foundation bearing the name of a janitor who'd changed everything, at the sun who could finally see sunsets, at the empty space where empires used to stand, now filled with something infinitely more valuable. Purpose, truth, love. Yes, he whispered. For the first time in my life, I think I actually am. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the world in colors Noah was still learning to name, and as the golden light faded into evening, Ethan pulled his son close and spoke the truth that had taken 10 years and one extraordinary woman to teach him. It was never about sight, he whispered. It was about finally learning to see. Sometimes the richest people in the world are the poorest in vision, and sometimes the most invisible people carry the greatest light. This story reminds us that true healing doesn't come from what we can buy, but from what we're willing to see. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that compassion changes everything. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that challenge how we see the world, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered your success was built on someone else's suffering? The next video is already waiting on your screen, another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Click it now. Because the best way to honor stories like this is to keep learning how to see. Thank you for watching, and remember, light always finds its way home.